Seated. Good morning. Welcome to this morning's service. It's good to see all of you here for today's service. These services that we participate in are opportunities for us to hear the teachings of the Buddha, to refresh our memories, to discover new things, to think about what we are hearing. In the Dharma school service, I talked a little bit about how in Buddhism you are encouraged to question, to think about what you're hearing, to think about what you're seeing, not to simply trust or believe in things that you hear or see. And this is just something that we should be doing regardless of whether we're Buddhists or not, regardless of whether we are a part of the Buddha Dharma. We should be thinking about the world in which we live and questioning what we see and hear and think about. There was a example in the stories of the Buddha where a student came to Shakyamuni. Well, I guess he wasn't a student yet. So he said, I'll become a student of yours, and I'll do whatever you want, whatever you teach, and I'll listen and do as you say. And so as was customary in that time, the student came and washed the feet of the Buddha and dried his feet off and set the bowl aside, dried his feet off, and was ready to hear the teachings. And then Shakyamuni Buddha said, please, now that you are ready to hear the teachings, please drink the water. So here was this dirty water that the feet of the Buddha had just been washed in. And the student said, no, I can't do that. That's dirty water. We just washed your feet in that. But Shakyamuni Buddha said, well, you said you would do and whatever I say. So he said again, drink the water. I said, no, I can't do that. So Shakyamuni Buddha, said that don't simply say you'll do and anything that I say. You have to be responsible in your thinking. Be responsible in what you do. You cannot simply hear and see things in a way without thinking about it. So Buddhism encourages us to, reflect on our experiences. In Jodo Shinshu, to hear means to hear not just with the ears, but to hear with your whole being. We have kiku in the onaijin. And there are a lot of these chrysanthemum decorations in the onaijin. So this is called a kiku rinto. So it's a lantern, chrysanthemum lantern. There are other connections with the kiku. Kiku is a symbol of the imperial household. And at one time, there was a familial relationship with the imperial household, and so we were able to use the kiku symbol. But aside from that, the kiku rinto has been a long time a part of Jodo Shinshu tradition, because kiku in Japanese is chrysanthemum, but it also means to hear, to listen. And so visually we're reminded, and of course, if you don't know Japanese, it's just a pretty flower. But under that culture, under that background, there is this visual reminder to listen, not just with your ears again, but with your whole being. So that we're not just absorbing this information, but with our whole being, which means we also are thinking about what we're hearing. Not just accepting what we're being told. In Jodo Shinshu, the word shinjin has been expressed as, or translated as faith. The word faith kind of implies, this entrust, to trust something that is not recognizable or knowable, to have faith in that. But before we get to the point of having faith in something that we don't understand, that's something that is boundless and infinite, to trust in that, we need to look carefully at who trusts. We need to look carefully at who I am, what my capacity, what my ability, what I'm doing, before we can truly trust. Buddhism is about the resolution of the difficulties that we experience as human beings, the difficulties that we can validate in our own lives. And there are a lot of different ways to resolve problems, whether it's to apply yourself diligently to a problem, to study more, to work harder, to the other extreme of just simply doing away with the problem. And we can see where that solution has expressed itself in warfare, where people are at war with each other because we cannot resolve the differences that exist between people. So it's not just within ourselves, but that is expressed through the life that surrounds us. So we try to resolve these problems through economics or politics, through discipline. We try many different ways of resolving these difficulties. And Buddhism suggests its own solution to these difficulties. And it's outlined in the Four Noble Truths. The first of the Four Noble Truths describes our current condition, what we are experiencing. And we can, again, look around us and we can see and test. Is this true? Does it have, is it valid? And if it's not, then we move on to something else. When Shakyamuni Buddha says that, and this was the first thing that he talked about after his enlightenment, he said, human beings, we experience difficulties in our lives, and those difficulties are not just there for no cause or no reason that these difficulties emerge. And that those difficulties arise because we don't see things clearly. The term he uses is tanha. We become attached to our views and the way that we want things to happen. We don't see things clearly. We see only things through our likes and dislikes, our preferences, the way that this should be or this shouldn't be, or this has to be, this color or this color. And in our everyday life, it's okay to make those kinds of decisions. But in the issues that affect us deeply, those kinds of attachments can result in differences that become irresolvable until we are able to step back and look more carefully at what we are doing in our lives. And so Shakyamuni Buddha suggested that because of that, because the difficulties that we experience arise from our attachment to things, to ideas and likes and dislikes, to the way things should be, my opinions, our feelings, our thoughts. Because we are attached to these things, we need to look more carefully at what we are experiencing, what we're saying, what we're doing. That there is a way to resolve that. That there is a experience where these difficulties no longer exist. So he called that nirvana, or he described that as nirvana. Enlightenment, sukha. So the first of the Four Noble Truths is dukkha. Dukkha means difficulties. Sukha is the opposite of dukkha. And it's a word, sukha is a word we're all familiar with. But it's in another language. Sukha is the jo of Jodo, the pure of Pure Land. That's what sukha is. Sukha is the antonym, the opposite of dukkha. So Jodo, or Pure Land, in its original form, is ska vati. Vati is place. So the place where suffering no longer exists. And so that's what Buddhism is about. That's what Buddhism is moving us toward. Freedom from difficulties, the resolution of the difficulties that we experience as human beings. That's all that Buddhism is about. All of the other information substantiates that, validates that, builds on this fundamental, basic premise, core premise in Buddhism. How do we resolve the difficulties that we experience? And in the way to resolve these difficulties, in this first sermon that Shakyamuni Buddha gave, is the Eightfold Path. So we experience difficulties. That's the first of the Four Noble Truths. And again, if that's not the case, there's no longer any need for Buddhism. If everything is okay, there's no need for Buddhism. You know, when we have an institution like Buddhism, and we have a sangha like this, we want to preserve and we want to continue the history and legacy and all of those who have contributed to the existence of this institution. But that's not what Buddhism is about. Buddhism is not about the institution. The institution is like the vessel. Without the vessel, that you can't have something be passed along. And in this case, the vessel contains the teachings of the Buddha. But as important as the vessel is, the container is, the contents is what's important. The contents is what we, as individuals, have to become familiar with, the content. It's like having, I'm thinking of having a nice bottle of wine at home. You have a nice bottle of wine. And I've had occasionally, these nice wines, and I remember this one bottle was a nice wine, and these are not real expensive things by any means, but it was a nice wine. It was known as a good year, and so I held on to it. I kept it in what I thought was a nice, cool place, and properly stored, with the bottle tipping towards the cork so that it wouldn't dry out, and taking good care of it. And then we decided, okay, let's open up this bottle of wine and enjoy the wine. It had sat too long. So I had, the outside of the bottle was great. I mean, the bottle of wine is labeled. I mean, it told me everything I needed to know about the wine, what year it was, what variety, and where it came from, and all of that information that the label was able to convey. But I wasn't able to enjoy its contents. So it's a nice bottle of wine, but the contents, which is the most important part of that bottle of wine, I couldn't enjoy. I don't know what happened to it. I don't think I let it sit too long. I think it was poor bottling. The cork was kind of getting, after I took off that wrapper, it wasn't a screw cap, so there was an actual cork in it. the cork was starting to decay, and so I don't know what happened to it. It might have been just a bad bottle. But all of that time, right, I was thinking about all this wonderful wine that I would be able to enjoy. And I'm not a real wine drinker. I don't really drink very much in any case, but the idea of having this. And so we can appreciate the container and all that the container describes, but unless you are able to somehow recognize what and experience what's within, then it's just a container. Then we can pass it along. That's why, kodomo no tameni, it's as important as that is, it's missing something. I think we say kodomo no tameni, for the sake of the children. But sometimes we say so much for the sake of the children that we are unable to. That's like the outside. We are unable to experience what it is that we want to pass along. If we don't pass the values that kodomo no tameni, for the sake of the children, is expressing, if we don't experience it for ourselves, then we're just passing on a container. Just passing on a container. And it's like the institution of our temples and our Buddhism as a whole. If we are just passing it on, then we are missing an important part of what Buddhism is describing. To think, to reflect upon, to listen, to experience and enjoy the contents of the Dharma. So the Four Noble Truths is like one of these contents, right? Or one of these containers. And it says that we experience difficulties as human beings. We experience difficulties. The cause of those difficulties, from a Buddhist perspective, is attachment to views, attachment to ideas, attachment to my way of seeing the world. That's what the cause of these difficulties are. And so if I can become freed of those attachments, then I can become freed of those difficulties. And the fourth of the Four Noble Truths describes a way to do that, the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is kind of a summary of all of the practices of Buddhism. These are the things that you do in order to attain enlightenment. All of the disciplines, the study, the reflections, all of these things are contained within that Eightfold Path. And as you unpack it, all of the various kinds of practices emerge. In Jodo Shinshu, what Shinran understood, and Jodo Shinshu is a part of Buddhism. Right? It's a part of Buddhism. Not just the name, not just externally, it's grounded, rooted in Buddhism. And I think for the longest time, there was a kind of disconnect between Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism. I mean, we understood that Jodo Shinshu is a part of Buddhism. But because Jodo Shinshu was talking about birth in the Pure Land, Amida Buddha, the only connection that we had was this kind of this Pure Land, right? The Pure Land. Go to the Pure Land. Just have faith. Go to the Pure Land. But in this structure of the Four Noble Truths, this pattern, this container, I think for Shinran, who recognized his inability to do the Eightfold Path, fulfill the requirements of the Eightfold Path, after 20 years on Heizan, he came back down. I mean, he came down. Came out of Heizan. Couldn't cut it as a Tendai priest. I mean, he was okay. I mean, he was a practicing Tendai monk for 20 years. And he was not without resources, and so I'm sure he did well. But in his understanding, he was not approaching what Buddhism was about. again, there was a container of Tendai. And all of the practices prescribed, all of these things, doing the form, doing the rituals, doing the practice, doing the ceremonies. But the content was not being approachable, not able to approach the content, which was a resolution of difficulties. That's what Buddhism is about. And so he left Heiza. What he learned from his teacher Honen, and through his own examination of his experience, reflecting on the teachings of the Buddha, was that through infinite wisdom and compassion, all beings are moved toward the resolution of difficulties. That we are all sustained, all carried toward the resolution of difficulties by wisdom and compassion. And we identify that as Amida Buddha. And there is a whole mythology about Dharmakara, Lokeshvara Naja, and Amida Buddha. But it's this movement from our unenlightened state, characterized by difficulties, to the resolution of those difficulties through life itself that moves us. And we simply need to be mindful of what we are experiencing. This isn't for someone else. This isn't me saying to you, you have to be mindful. You have to think about. You have to be more aware. It's me saying to myself that this is what needs to be done. That in order to begin to approach what the Buddha was talking about, I need to think. I need to reflect upon. I need to be mindful of the things that I say and do, how I engage the world, how I interact with the world. And in that way we begin to approach what Shakyamuni described as Sukha Vati, the Pure Land, Jodo, the resolution of difficulties that I experience as a human being. Mindfulness is a word that has become more widely used. And mindfulness is something that you're thinking about what you're doing, saying, and how it affects the world around us. Buddhism's basic posture is not to cause harm. And don't cause harm. Whether it's in words and deeds or in whatever we're doing, don't cause harm. To be mindful of our actions so that our actions and our words, even our thinking, will not result in difficulties for others or for myself. We sometimes realize that our actions do result in difficulties. And in those times, we begin to see the depth of our foolishness, our inability to resolve the simple thing, the difficulties that that result from our actions. And in those times, we say Namo Amida Butsu. In those times, when we realize the difficulties that arise out of my actions, I say Namo Amida Butsu. That I am able to eventually, through infinite wisdom and compassion, resolve the difficulties that I am immersed in. Namo Amida Butsu. And this is why we say in Jodo Shinshu, the Nembutsu of Jodo Shinshu is Kansho no Nembutsu, gratitude and appreciation. That I, in my limited, finite, foolish self, I am able to eventually resolve the difficulties that characterize my existence. Shinran understood this throughout his life, a deepening understanding of his own foolishness, but sustained by infinite wisdom and compassion. Indeed, he was truly grateful for the vow of Amida Buddha. Okay. Buddhism is really very simple. It's really very simple. We use a lot of words, we use a lot of descriptions, but it's about the resolution of difficulties. That's all it's about. And because we don't see things clearly, we encounter difficulties or cause difficulties for others. And so to be mindful of our actions, what we're doing, to be mindful of how what we say and do and think affects the lives around us. And again, it's very simple.